In every corner of our society, the narrative of a human life starts with childhood, a time brimming with hope, learning, and the promise of a brighter future. However, for some, that initial promise is clouded by hardship, neglect, and a series of circumstances that lead them down a dark path. Tonight, we delve into the lives of individuals whose journeys took them from troubled beginnings to the harsh reality of death row. They represent a broader, painful story: how early life experiences, systemic failures, and a contentious justice system have intertwined to create destinies that culminate in execution. Childhood serves as the bedrock upon which a person constructs their future. In environments rife with instability, neglect, or outright abuse, that foundation can be so severely compromised that the very essence of a life is forever changed. For some, those formative years are characterized by poverty, broken families, and a lack of nurturing support. In such situations, the path forward becomes fraught with danger, making it all too easy for a child to become ensnared in a cycle of violence and despair. Today, we examine how the grim journey from childhood to execution is not merely a tale of inherent evil, but often a narrative of a society that failed to protect its most vulnerable children before it was too late. Dalton Prejean's story is one of many that remind us how little we sometimes understand about the person behind the headlines. Public records and media reports provide only snippets: a childhood reportedly marked by hardship, a series of missteps that ultimately led him to death row, and a life concluding in a moment of irreversible finality.
Nothing is going to be accomplished. I have peace with myself. I'd like to thank all of those who supported me all these years.
While detailed, verified accounts of Dalton Prejean's early life are scarce, what we do know suggests he grew up in an environment where hope was hard to come by. Witnesses have indicated that his upbringing was marked by economic struggles and family instability. These early difficulties, coupled with a lack of proper guidance and social support, may have set him on a path toward a society that is quick to judge and slow to empathize. On the day of his trial, records show that Prejean faced charges that would ultimately lead to the death penalty. His time on death row was both isolated and controversial. In the quiet hallways of correctional facilities, where each day drags on toward an uncertain future, Prejean's story became a silent reminder of a system that often fails to address the underlying causes of criminal behavior. Johnny Frank Garrett's life, as captured in limited court records and media reports, reveals a man whose troubled childhood led to a chaotic adulthood. While detailed biographical information is hard to find, the key moments of his journey are enough to evoke a profound sense of tragedy. Garrett's early years were marked by instability, characterized by a turbulent home life and limited opportunities that could have guided him toward a better future. His encounters with the law began at a young age, and soon he found himself in situations that led to acts of violence. The legal system, which often lacks the capacity for rehabilitation, deemed him guilty, resulting in a death sentence. Garrett's case sparked discussions among legal scholars and human rights advocates who ponder whether a deeper understanding of a person's early life could have influenced the outcome. His time on death row was filled with isolation and long days steeped in regret, anger, and perhaps a yearning for redemption. Yet, in the eyes of the law, there was no way to reverse the verdict delivered in a courtroom that did not have the luxury of time to consider the broader context of his upbringing. Charles Rumbaugh is a name that echoes with the somber tones of a story only partially revealed. The specifics of his early life remain shrouded in the mists of time and incomplete records. However, what little information exists indicates that Rumbaugh faced hardships from a young age that could easily derail a life.
Charles "Chuck" Rumbaugh was just 17 at the time. Rumball admitted to carrying out the robbery, but claimed he was forced to act when Fiorillo reached for a weapon. The incident marked the culmination of Rumball's troubled youth, which included a history of criminal activity.
In communities where resources are scarce and guidance is minimal, even minor missteps can trigger a series of unfortunate events. Rumball's journey appears to follow this pattern. While details of his childhood are elusive, could early intervention have changed his trajectory? Or was he ultimately a victim of circumstances beyond his control? Share your thoughts in the comment section. Douglas Christopher Thomas's name appears in legal records and death row rosters, yet the full story of his early life remains unclear. For many inmates like Thomas, the early years are filled with more questions than answers, a series of events that are either undocumented or faded with time. Reports indicate that Thomas, similar to many who face capital punishment, may have grown up in a childhood devoid of the support systems that many take for granted. Raised in an environment where violence, poverty, and social dislocation were prevalent, he was likely set on a path that strayed far from the ideals of rehabilitation and opportunity. His subsequent criminal actions, which ultimately led to his death sentence, were often described as the outcome of a series of unfortunate events and systemic neglect. In the corridors of justice, Thomas's case became one of many cited in discussions about the reliability of our legal system regarding individuals whose formative years were filled with significant adversity. His time on death row was not merely a punishment. It was a quiet testament to a life that could have unfolded differently under more compassionate circumstances.
A brutal murder in Texas.
He went crazy. He started shooting all over the place.
Lands a 17-year-old offender on death row.
Young people were committing very adult crimes.
Ruben Montoya's journey reflects the countless cases where a person's beginnings are linked to a legacy of struggle. Although public records on Montoya's early life do not disclose every detail, the pieces that do exist reveal a youth marked by hardship and limited opportunities. Montoya is often remembered not just for the crime that led to his death sentence, but also for the larger questions his case raises about how early environments shape our destinies. Many who have examined his situation suggest that if there had been intervention during his formative years, his life could have taken a different direction. Instead, the heavy burden of a difficult childhood, combined with a justice system that was either unwilling or unable to consider those early influences, led him down a path that ended on death row. When discussing Montoya, advocates for criminal justice reform often express sorrow that his story, like many others, is a complex narrative woven from threads of lost potential and systemic neglect. Toronto Patterson is a name shrouded in mystery. Unlike some cases where every detail of an inmate's life is thoroughly examined, there is little public record of Patterson's early years. What is evident, however, is that his journey, one that brought him to the harsh reality of death row, was shaped by early life circumstances that remain largely unrecorded. In communities where record-keeping and social support systems are lacking, many stories like Patterson's fade into obscurity. While the details of his upbringing may be limited, the fact that he faced capital punishment speaks volumes about the intersections of personal choice, systemic failure, and societal neglect. Napoleon Beasley's journey through the penal system is both mysterious and tragic. While public records provide scant details about his early childhood, the outline of his life indicates that the challenges he faced as a young person were anything but typical. Beasley's story is frequently referenced by those who believe that early intervention could be crucial in breaking the cycle of crime. Although the specifics of his upbringing are not well documented, there are signs that he grew up in an environment fraught with instability and financial struggles. Such conditions can leave lasting emotional wounds that, when coupled with a lack of societal support, may ultimately lead to choices that spiral out of control. The case of Napoleon Beasley serves as a powerful reminder that the roots of later criminal behavior are not always found in inherent malice, but often in a landscape of neglect, suffering, and unmet needs. His path to death row resonates with many who argue that society must do more to support its most vulnerable individuals. J. Kelly Pinkerton's story is another case where the details of early life remain frustratingly elusive. Despite his well-documented presence on death row, public records provide few insights into the formative years that might have clarified the path he took. For Pinkerton, the shadow of a troubled past is evident in the limited accounts that do exist, accounts that suggest an upbringing characterized by instability and social isolation. His eventual conviction and death sentence have ignited discussions among legal experts and social reformers who contend that the absence of early support and intervention played a significant role in his downward trajectory. While the details of Pinkerton's childhood may be unclear or incomplete, his story serves as a powerful reminder. It urges us to reflect on the social and economic factors that foster despair and criminal behavior, prompting us to consider whether a more compassionate approach could have altered his destiny. Among the cases we discuss tonight, Sean Sellers stands out as one whose background is well documented and whose experience on death row is frequently referenced in discussions about the death penalty in America. Unlike some of his peers, Sellers' early life was filled with a series of hardships that are recorded in court documents and media coverage.
It could cause you to have any mercy on me whatsoever. I know I didn't come here to ask for justice.
Growing up in an environment where violence and neglect were ever present, Sean Sellers' childhood was anything but typical. Reports suggest that from a young age, he was surrounded by a reality that offered few options beyond the life he ultimately led. His involvement in violent crimes, which resulted in his conviction and placement on death row, is often examined not only for the severity of his actions, but also for what they reveal about the larger societal issues at play. Sellers' case has become a symbol in the ongoing debate over capital punishment. Supporters argue that his actions cannot be understood without considering a past filled with suffering and neglect. His time on death row was marked by profound, often unexpressed regret, a quiet recognition of a life that could have taken a different path if he had been given a chance for redemption. No discussion on the tragic journeys of death row inmates would be complete without the poignant case of George Stinney. At just 14 years old, Stinney's life came to an end in a courtroom in 1944. A trial that lasted only a few hours, and a verdict that would weigh heavily on the conscience of a nation for years to come.
On June 16, 1944, a 14-year-old boy named George Stinney was executed in the electric chair in Columbia, South Carolina.
George Stinney was a young African-American boy who holds the grim distinction of being the youngest person executed in modern U.S. history. Convicted of murdering 2 white girls under circumstances that have since raised significant doubts, his trial was plagued by racial bias, poor legal representation, and a hasty rush to judgment. In a system that failed to afford him the fundamental protections of due process, Stinney's fate was determined before he could fully grasp the seriousness of the charges against him. Years later, his case has been revisited by scholars, civil rights advocates, and legal experts who contend that his execution was not an act of justice, but rather a heartbreaking failure of a system entrenched in injustice. As we reflect on the lives of these individuals, it becomes painfully evident that each path to death row is not merely the outcome of a single choice or misdeed. Instead, these narratives represent the culmination of a lifetime of challenges, often marked from the outset by hardship, neglect, and the lack of support that many of us take for granted. For numerous death row inmates, the experience is characterized by a slow, relentless passage of time, a stretch filled with introspection, solitude, and at times, a deep sense of remorse. In these long, torturous days, the prison walls become not just a physical barrier, but a representation of a society that has, in many instances, already dismissed them. Each case compels us to confront tough questions. What responsibility does society hold for the circumstances that lead to crime? How might early intervention and compassionate support have altered these lives? And ultimately, is there any hope for redemption for those who appear to have reached the end of their journey? Across the country, legal experts, activists, and everyday people are engaged in an ongoing discussion about whether the death penalty is a just or effective way to address crime. Some believe it is the only fitting punishment for certain offenses, while others view it as a hasty and irreversible choice, one that, once executed, eliminates any chance for redemption or correction. Although tonight's exploration of the lives of death row inmates is undeniably somber, it also carries a glimmer of hope, urging us to scrutinize and reform a system that frequently neglects the significant influence of early life experiences. By recognizing the factors that lead individuals to a life of crime, we can foster conversations about how to prevent such tragedies in the future.